Welcome to an exceptional edition of Rebellion's educational series. We have an American treasure, hero, General David Petraeus with us to give us lessons on leadership. Thank you so much, General, for coming on.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Michael Jordan said, leadership has a price. So I pulled people along when they didn't want to. I challenged people when they didn't want to be challenged. And I gained the respect of my fellow athletes. How would you say that you handle this concept in your career?
Well, Michael Jordan, first of all, was truly legendary in his accomplishments. The best all time with 6 championships and all the rest. And he did indeed inspire, cajole, pull, push, provide the example, energy, and just a fierce competitive spirit to any organization that he was part of, and did it really incomparably if you think about all of the accomplishments over the years. When I have thought about leadership, I have often dismissed a little bit the idea that leadership is just about imposing one's will on others or on an organization. That can be part of what a leader has to do, especially in a really challenging moment of urgency and all the rest. But by and large, I've generally felt that you need to exercise leadership that inspires, that explains, that brings along, that tries to create a context, a situation, to provide a leadership style that can bring out the best in each of one's individual reports and the organization collectively. Now, needless to say, that style has to be different over the course of one's career. If you think about this militarily, the style that worked when I was a young airborne ranger lieutenant in a platoon of paratroopers, that's a very different style. It's a very physical, it's a very much a follow me, do as I do, a bit of cheerleading. It's visceral. It's you're leading by personal example right at the organizational level. And then, of course, as you make your way up through the ranks, that style understandably has to change. You reach a point where it's not just all male hardcore paratroopers. There are those of other gender. There are those of other branches and specialties. You can get into some of the branches that have a degree of ego attached to them, and leading those requires a little bit more patience at times than might be the case again in a small cohesive unit of young paratroopers. And of course, when you get to the point of something like the CIA, where I was privileged to be the director, you've got a variety of different groups within that organization, each of which requires a slightly different style. So the style with the analytical side of the organization, for example, these are very cerebral, seriously bright, tremendously knowledgeable individuals, often with multiple advanced degrees. And with them, you're almost in a professor mode, or perhaps a student mode with some. But you can get into the intellectual back and forth that, again, academics enjoy, and which, frankly, I enjoyed, having had an academic past as well. Whereas you get on the operator side, if you will, the clandestine service, the spies, the human intelligence collection operations officers, and the paramilitary. And that is, again, a bit more action oriented. It's a bit more degree of enormous initiative, capacity to react to different circumstances, ingenuity, an ability to make something out of a difficult situation. And then you have the technology experts, the techies. You have actually the best logistics people and metal benders and woodworkers in the world, believe it or not. And you've got the support elements that have a whole variety of different capabilities as well, not to mention those that are the big data experts and the open source intelligence experts and so forth. So, and each of those needs a slightly different style, in my view, to bring out the best, to create a context in which each of them individually that report to you and then the organization collectively can be all that they can be, which is, I think, what it is that we're trying to do. And it takes, again, a variety of different styles over the years through the different units and the different circumstances. And I think one of the keys to leadership is actually acknowledging that no style of leadership is going to prove right for every different type of organization, every different type of circumstance and context. And in some cases, you may have the luxury of time to conduct this, the listening tour and be on receive mode. And then there are times like the beginning of the surge where you know that you're going to be testifying to Congress within 6 months of taking command, and there have to be results by that time, or the entire policy could be constrained by a vote of Congress. So again, there are many different circumstances out there, and I think successful leaders typically have demonstrated an ability to determine what the right style of leadership is for those different circumstances. But before going farther, I probably should lay out what I think are the 4 key tasks of strategic leaders, the leaders at the top, because these are critical. And we'll keep coming back to these because it's a very good intellectual construct for strategic leadership in particular. That's, again, the leader who's truly making the fundamental decisions at the top for an organization. The first of those tasks is to get the big ideas right. You've got to get the strategy right. If you don't have it right, everything you do from there on is building on a very shaky or certainly not a solid intellectual foundation, and that is very dangerous. The fact is that in the surge in Iraq, the surge that mattered most was the surge of ideas, not the surge of forces. It was the change in strategy of 180 degrees of going from consolidating on big bases, handing off tasks to Iraqi security forces, preparing to go home, to realizing that those Iraqi security forces no longer could handle the escalating level of violence, that the country was on the edge of a civil war. We had to provide better security for the people, without which nothing else was possible. So we had to go back downtown, back into the neighborhood, 77 additional locations just in the Baghdad division area of responsibility alone. And we had to take back control from our Iraqi counterparts, then pull them offline, reconstitute them, fill them back up with people, equipment, and some training, and then back into the line only then. And over time, gradually thin out, gradually hand off, but that after a year or a year and a half of very solid results. And we recognized that we couldn't kill or capture our way out of industrial strength insurgency. We had to reconcile with as many of the rank and file of the Sunni insurgent organizations and the Shia militia supported by Iran, the rank and file, even as we intensified the effort to capture or kill the irreconcilables, the leaders of al-Qaeda in Iraq, the major Sunni insurgent groups, and the Iranian-supported Shia militia organizations. Those are the big ideas. Now, in an ideal situation, you'd come into an organization and you would, through a series of iterative, open, transparent, and inclusive drills, if you will, or processes, you would gradually arrive at the big ideas. And that's the way I sought to do it, for example, at the CIA. In the surge, we didn't have that luxury, beyond which many of us had already spent 2 or more years on the ground. I was well over 2 1/3, nearly 2.5 years on the ground. We'd spent the previous 15 months determining what it was we needed to do, how we had to reshape every aspect of preparing our forces, leaders, units, equipment, and everything else. And so when we hit the ground on the surge, we had the big ideas. We had a counterinsurgency field manual that we had just written, just published a month earlier, after a intensive year of drafting that and finalizing it. We knew what we needed to do. And then it was incumbent to perform the second task of strategic leader, which is to communicate the big ideas through the depth and breadth of the organization. And that's crucial. They have to understand how to operationalize those as well at their level. So the young strategic sergeant or strategic lieutenant, as we call them, because their tactical actions could have strategic implications, they had to understand how to translate big ideas at my level into concrete action at their level, outside the wire, under body armor and Kevlar with weapon, doing what only they could do, which was to engage the enemy and also to engage the population. So I put out a letter on the first day to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and civilians of the multinational force Iraq. I, in the first speech, emphasized the need to secure the people, which we could only do by living with them, change the mission statement, changed the operational plan, and then over a series of months changed all the other annexes and activities associated with the different lines of operation that we were pursuing. So again, that's crucial. And of course, you're doing it up and out and with your counterparts, your coalition members, and everything else. And then you have to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. This is what we normally think of as leadership. This is attracting the right people, hiring them. It's allowing those that aren't measuring up to move on to something else. It's rewarding those who perform well. It's incentivizing. It is providing example and energy and determination, and that tone, that style that we discussed earlier being very, very important as well. It's actually how you determine whether you're winning or losing. It's the metrics and how you ratchet those down and make sure the definitions are very clear and you understand how the information is being gathered and deconflicted and so on. And it's seeing it for yourself. And above all, it's really how you spend your time. And we had a huge butcher block pad of paper that laid out what I did on every single day in combat during the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. What did we do several times a week? What did we do once a week? And then what did we do every other week? Monthly meetings of the commanders, the 2 stars and above. Actually, weekly, we had the 3 stars and above. And then quarterly, the ambassador and I chaired a 6-hour long campaign plan review and analysis that was attended by virtually all the major commanders, the other ambassadors, everybody. People would come in from Washington and Tampa, where Central Command headquarters was, and so forth. So that's that process. And again, that's what we normally think of as leadership, because we tend to skip over that first crucial task, which is getting the big ideas right. And then there's a fourth task that is sometimes overlooked as well, and that is to sit down formally with various action forcing mechanisms to determine how to refine the big ideas so that you can do it all again and again and again. And we had a number of these. I would meet weekly, for example, with the strategic planners. In fact, I think it was more than once a week. There were other meetings that we had on the calendar on this battle rhythm, if you will, how I spent my time, that would force me to make decisions on certain actions that we would have to take months in advance, because we're at the strategic level. At the 4-star level, it has to filter down through the 3-star, the 2 stars, the colonels, the lieutenant colonels, the captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and so forth, down to the individual soldier on the ground. And we also had a monthly session where we had the team leaders of all these lessons learned teams. We had one from the Army, the Marine Corps, Joint Special Ops, Asymmetric Warfare Group, my Counterinsurgency Center. All of these were all over the battlefield. They would bring back lessons that they believe needed to be learned, but lessons not learned until it's actually incorporated in the big ideas and the campaign plan, SOPs, policies communicated, and then actually executed. So that's a very, very important construct, I think, to keep in mind as we discuss particularly strategic leadership, which is very applicable whether you're, again, commanding the surge in Iraq, director of the CIA, or frankly, the head of Netflix or Alibaba or Amazon, Jeff Bezos being one of the greatest of strategic leaders, certainly in our time, if not for all times. So
if you had
thinking our way through that is important.
If you had to pick one leader from World War II that inspired you the most, would it be Patton or would it be Truman, for instance?
Well, as always, it depends a leader at what level. I mean, if you're going to think of a coalition leader, gosh, I might pick Churchill. I mean, think about somebody who rallied a
Answer.
nation at
Yeah.
the depths of challenges. I mean, you can argue that he single-handedly sort of willed the nation through the Battle of Britain in the period of greatest vulnerability when Germany could have actually invaded
I couldn't agree more.
England
Yes.
before he turned east and went into Soviet Union and at least reduced the pressure of that particular threat. But again, it took more years of privation and air attacks every night and air raid sirens going off, all of this, and terrible casualties before, of course, the Americans arrive in sufficient numbers and equipment and start providing way beyond the Lend-Lease and all the rest of that, not just to the UK, but also, of course, to our other allies, which interestingly included the Soviet Union at that time as well. So, I mean, again, I think as a coalition leader, he was extraordinary. I think if you think of another, say, coalition leader, Eisenhower would be. He had to contend with Churchill. I mean, Churchill had these incredible strengths, but
And manage Patton. I mean,
dealing with him was not the easiest. He had to protect Patton from himself on several different occasions, saved Patton together with General Marshall back in Washington. And so, so that's Eisenhower was a great coalition leader. He was not a great operational leader. Actually, when he was in North Africa, the results were sort of middling. I mean, they actually suffered a terrible reverse at Kasserine Pass, one of the first big engagements for the United States, ultimately prevail, but it was not what one would say one for the history books. It was not Grant at Vicksburg or something like that, you know, a great maneuver battle. And in fact, as a strategic leader, even there, he got D-Day right, which is the biggest, and that's almost in some ways all that mattered. And they worked their way through that, but missed an opportunity to close the pincers at the Fleiss pocket and trap hundreds of thousands of Germans from getting away at one point in time, despite pressure from Patton and others to do that. But again, what he did was he just kept this whole effort going and just, you know, oversaw meticulous planning, again, had to deal with the egos, not just of Churchill, but also of Montgomery, of Patton, even Bradley, the soldier, you know, was not without an ego. Certainly de Gaulle, a handful of, again, the national leaders and so forth. So, and again, an extraordinary job in that regard. But if you want to talk, again, battlefield leadership, that's where you would look at someone like Patton. You'd look at some of the other division commanders, General Ridgway of the 82nd Airborne Division, for example, even Brigadier General Tony McAuliffe at the Battle of Bastogne, who, when the Germans ask him to surrender, sends back nuts to them. So again, it's always at what level. And then what about the heroics of an Audie Murphy, of these incredible battlefield heroes as well. So as always, it's leader of what and leader at what level. There were some that were brilliant tactically, operationally, strategically. Patton probably, certainly tactically and operationally, not strategically. Again, it was his own words that almost cost him his positions a couple of different times, or his actions. So I think it's always a bit more complex than perhaps it seems in watching the movie version of Patton or something like that.
Of course, of course. This has been such an amazing experience. Thank you so much. May I ask one last World War II question while I have you?
Sure.
Why do you think the Germans did not advance on Dunkirk?
Well, there are a bunch of what ifs actually involving the Germans. That's only one of them. Again, as usual, it's the failure to see an opportunity and to seize it. I think perhaps they were so busy patting themselves on the back for what they'd just done with this blitzkrieg offensive that achieved so much more than they achieved in all of World War I, that again, they just were too slow to recognize that they could finish this off if they continued and went after Dunkirk. But the same as you know, they failed to take advantage of that opportunity to perhaps to invade England, instead of going east to the Soviet Union, which of course ended up being a quagmire for them and totally inadequately planned with vastly overly optimistic projections, didn't even have cold weather gear for what would turn out to be just a truly miserable experience for the soldiers on the ground out on the Eastern Front. And then, why weren't they more agile? Why didn't they react more rapidly to the invasion in Normandy and got deceived and thought it would come in Calais or some other location? Again, these are the imponderables of history. And inevitably, there are sort of individual actions here that, Hitler slept in on that morning, or Rommel had to go back to Germany and wasn't present at the Western Front, this kind of thing. Those do actually play a role inevitably in what transpires in history.
And very last question before I let you go. What is your advice for the 17-year-old aspiring soldier?
Well, this will sound somewhat trite, but it is truly to understand that life is a competitive endeavor, that you don't get a trophy or a t-shirt just for showing up in the real world, that you really have to try to be the absolute best that you possibly can be to truly achieve excellence. That, again, in the real world, nobody admires the gentleman's C or somebody who's too cool for school, especially in truth, if you're in an organization that could actually go to combat on short notice. It was really quite remarkable to see the transformation of our military, even of West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. I remember speaking there after we'd done the invasion of Iraq. And there was a focus among the cadets because they knew they were going to graduate into an army at war and that they were going to deploy without question in the course of the next 2 years, that they would be in a unit, either very quickly after arrival or certainly within, again, a year or so, given the rotation rates at that time for units that were literally doing a year in Iraq or Afghanistan, a year home, and then a year back out. And that became 15 months during the surge. And so the seriousness of purpose, again, the commitment to truly understanding how they would carry out their responsibilities to master the tactical level activities and so forth, was really quite dramatic. And it was in contrast to the kind of attitude that you saw in truth in my day and in other days when the academy graduates were not anticipating going right into combat, and there was a degree of what might be termed too cool for school. The cool guys sort of tried to flout whatever the regulations were. You flirt with sideburns that are too long, or these meaningless kinds of activities. In the grand scheme of things, if you're contemplating actually leading America's sons and daughters in combat within a few months of your graduation from your officer basic course. So again, at the end of the day, life is about achievement, and you have to really work and drive hard and have enormous determination to truly achieve excellence. Or again, one should not be surprised if all opportunities are not offered as one progresses up the line. You really don't get promoted for, quote, political reasons or for these other rationales that are sometimes given about folks. You get promoted for performance and the potential to perform at higher grades. And it has to really be something that is fiercely part of a unit. When I was privileged to lead at the smaller unit level, but all the way through, but especially, at this company and battalion and brigade level where you can still very easily sort of touch and influence and lead from the front and so forth. We sought to create competitive endeavors in everything that we did. And it was because we wanted individuals to absolutely be striving to achieve excellence. We had very clear standards. We had very clear incentives, rewards, very clear levels. This is excellence. And at a certain point, a unit just starts to live this kind of approach. It embraces it, and it almost runs itself. This is particularly the case in an infantry unit when you get, say, 20 enlisted or non-commissioned officer ranger qualified soldiers who, again, are just the embodiment of excellence. And they become not just standard bearers, but standard enforcers. And they won't allow something that is not too standard to go on without taking corrective action. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get an organization that, you know, it doesn't walk past some trash in your area on a sidewalk. They resent that. You know, they just, this is my area, by golly, and that is not acceptable to the standards that we have. And again, it's not that they pick it up when somebody's watching. They do it as a matter of course. And this just becomes ingrained in folks. When we used to run, when I was a 3-star general, and we would run every morning, usually my own team and a handful of different students from the staff college that I was privileged to be the commandant of, although it was really run by a 2-star deputy commandant. But we would pluck these majors and they'd come with us and work out. And I mean, we actually carried trash bags with us. My aide knew to do that. Wasn't something I had to remind him. And if we saw stuff on the side of the road, we'd actually pick it up along the way. Again, it's our post. We're proud of it. And that's the kind of attitude I think that has to inculcate a unit in all areas. And of course, vastly more important when it comes to the performance of the really crucial tasks of an organization, that you can perform those absolutely to standard under the most demanding of conditions, and that you do that in training so that by the time you're actually in combat, you have the kind of response that I got when I was a division commander of the Great 101st Airborne Division during the fight to Baghdad. I remember asking this one infantry battalion commander, so I said, how's it going? Bill Hickman, ultimately a 2-star general, did 4 combat tours with me, working directly for me. And he said, hey, sir, this is just like the walk and shoot that we did back at Fort Campbell. And it was, and we had these very realistic live fire exercises. They were so realistic, I got shot in one of them, took a round right through the chest, which provided great training for the medics as they had to get an IV going and make sure I didn't collapse of shock or something like that before getting to a hospital and then on to thoracic surgery. But again, that's the way you train. That's the way you approach life. That's the way you are always competing, striving to be the best that one can be. But by the way, competing to be the best team player that you and your organization can be, as well as the best overall. And getting that kind of culture, building that is just all important. I can't stress it too much.
Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. You're a hero of mine, and you're a hero to so many young men and women out there. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, General. And
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
And former
Great again to be with you.
General Petraeus. You have a great day and stay safe during this crazy time.
Thank you.